what our thoughts are as next steps before we start, the presentation, because you had a few questions to the team to, in terms of TNDC's request on how to move forward for the planning. And so there are a few folks that actually responded. Do you want to reiterate that before we start the actual presentation?
So what Elaine's referring to is that one of the reasons why we're doing these trainings is we're trying to get up to speed as Richmond District Rising. Nobody else is kind of managing housing development projects, how we weigh in as a community on housing development projects in the neighborhood. There's a really exciting development that's being proposed right now by Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. They want to develop 100 units of affordable senior housing at the corner of 6th and Geary. If you can picture where the funeral home is on the northwest corner across from KFC. And so they're wanting for us to engage with them around levels of affordability and who's being served there and what kind of community amenities we want to see in the project. So where they're at right now on that project is that they're in contract to purchase the site. They're saying that they won't be able to, they're scheduled right now to close on that acquisition on May 8th. So they wanted to meet with us before that happens. Our next general meeting for Richmond District Rising is next Monday, April 20th at 6 p.m. If you don't have that on your calendar, go ahead and mark it on your calendar. And so we were talking about having a meeting with TNDC just prior to that. I was just having a bit of a back and forth with them right before setting up this conference call right now. It sounds like they want to meet at 5 o'clock, maybe 5:15. So right before our 6 p.m. meeting. So yeah, so if you want to be on that meeting, go ahead and if you're not on the housing committee, because I know some of you who are on this video conference right now are not on the housing committee, go ahead and just email me and let me know that you want to be part of that, and I'll include you in that meeting. But otherwise,
what's your email?
Oh, what is my email? I am going to put it in the chat.
As well as the date and times again.
So next Monday, April 20th. So I'll put that in the chat also.
And I guess is with regards of should we be having our allies organizations that we also want to invite to be part of that meeting with TNDC?
Yeah, I'm working on that.
Okay. So, okay. Well,
so just to introduce tonight then before Arlene gets started. So really excited that all of you are here. In order for us to be kind of good stewards of our land use work and be able to weigh in a comprehensive way, the Housing Committee has been talking about doing a series of kind of land use trainings, housing trainings, so that we can get up to speed on how do we weigh in on housing developments or any other kind of development, and what does it mean to weigh in, how can we weigh in. So we figured we'd start with this first presentation, which is how does development even work? So we can all kind of get up to speed on having an understanding of, okay, when a developer comes to us to talk about something, what are they going through? What can we even talk with them about? How do they manage a project? And then there's the other side of it, which is not that reactive position of responding to what developers are proposing to us. But if we want to dream big and think about how we want the community to develop, how do we start to initiate kind of our own dreams and hopes of how we want that vacant parking lot or that abandoned school site or whatever to be developed in our community? And what do we want it to be developed for, and then how do we make that happen? So this will be kind of a series, an ongoing series. We haven't committed yet to all of the upcoming next presentations, but we wanted to get this one kicked off because we do have this opportunity to weigh in on the that development of Lease and Geary. So we wanted to make sure to get it started. But yeah, anyway, so that's what we were thinking. Elaine, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm gonna start sharing screen. Hold on a second.
Okay, while Elaine's getting that going, does anybody have any questions about that? Or any comments?
I think it's a great idea for us to be proactive, for sure.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, we're so we're really excited to have Elaine Yee, who's who works in housing development over at the Mission Economic Development Association, and Keith Cooley, who's works also in housing development. He's with the San Francisco Community Land Trust, that they're both going to be presenting to us this afternoon. They're both experts in their field and have an amazing presentation for you this evening. So if you can let them get through the presentation, hold your questions, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. For those of you who are not on video, because I know not everybody was able to connect with video. Well, if you are on video, Elaine and Keith are going to be sharing the presentation. They're going to be filling up your whole screen with their presentation. But if you're not on video, I emailed just a little bit ago the presentation in PDF form. So you should be able to go into your email, pull up that PDF, and follow along with the presentation. So if you haven't seen your email yet, go ahead and click over to your email and pull up the presentation. It's a PDF that's attached to the email I sent. And last bit of housekeeping, if everybody can mute their microphones, mute your audio so that when the presenters are speaking, we don't get any background interference from anybody else. So, and again, hold your questions, write them down, whatever you need to do, and we'll do Q&A at the end. Cool. All right, Elaine.
Okay, so hi everyone, Elaine. And Joseph has mentioned I work at Meta, Mission Economic Development Agency. Have been working on our affordable housing development for quite some time. And prior to being at Meta, I was over in the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, EBALDC. And today we're going to talk about how does affordable housing development process work, giving you all an idea, like, the timeline for things. And the presentation that I'll be working on mostly would be focusing on the typical traditional affordable housing sites. And Keith is going to follow with more on a type of affordable housing that is more available in San Francisco than anywhere else. So, which is more on the small sites side of things. So I'm gonna go through my presentation and then Keith is gonna go through small sites. So the overall housing development process, it basically could take 3 to 5 years as we go from concept to operations. And sometimes I would say that 3 to 5 years might also be in a quick timeline. Some projects you could see that it could get stalled for 7 to 10 years. It may seem like, and unfortunately, a lot of that might have happened being held up in the entitlements process, getting environmental clearance and whatnot. So we would go through this process through like these 4 steps: conceptual, which includes assessment of the capacity of the developer, figuring out the acquisition of the land or the building itself, because it could be like a bare piece of land or it could be an existing building. Number 2, we'll be going through the pre-development process, which takes the longest. That we go through entitlements, which include like planning department approvals, building permits. This is also the time that the developer would be securing the financing and going through like the design for pre-construction. Then itself will be getting through construction, the very important part as well. And then at the end is operations, which is our property management, residential services, which often goes along with affordable housing buildings, and also asset management. So specifically on the first step is assessment and feasibility. A lot of the questions that we have to answer is the physical design. How many units can this piece of land be able to fit? What type of, what sizes are they? Are they like 1-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units, studios, and whatnot? The other part is regulatory restrictions. Like, what is this land zoned for? Things that we would go through planning department. If the site is not zoned originally for housing, then how are we able to say that asking for a conditional use permit to change the zoning for that site? What's the height limit for the site as well? And if we're doing affordable housing, can we push the envelope to ask for a density bonus to maximize the number of units that we could have for that site as well? So that's on the design physical end. Then there's another piece why Richmond District Rising is very important in this case is like, what's the community piece of it? What does the community want out of all of this? What's the community's vision on this? And how can we gather community support to advocate for the development? And the other part would be definitely pre-development financing is something that the developer would also need to look into because without money, you cannot start looking into purchasing the building and also doing what we call due diligence work of trying to understand the building furthermore, environmental wise, like if it needs remediation or however that would be. And so that pre-development period is very important to also have being developers not doing free work during that time, still able to get some money out of that. And oftentimes we said that that's the highest risk financially because you never know if this project would pencil at the end of the day being able to build. So you really need to convince someone to be able to provide that money to you. And in San Francisco in particular for affordable housing, MoCD also have a pre-development financing available for projects. So oftentimes that's where we go to if at the end of the day there's MoCD money in this project as well. So moving along is acquiring land. I posted the picture here that Joseph put together at our last meeting as like the potential sites within the Richmond district as an example. Land is either available through the city could be issuing an RFQ response for a request for qualifications or proposals, and those are for city-owned land. And we've seen a flurry of RFQP in maybe 5 years ago that the city provided, and most of them were in the Mission because long-time advocacy like Mission did not have much affordable housing happening, and so the community really advocated for having affordable housing happen in the Mission District, and so they had a flurry of RFPs at the time, at least 5 projects that came out from the RFP process, and in this sense, like they would be at the end of the day, the city actually still owns the land. And the developer would be owning the improvements, the building itself of the project. Another idea is like, how can you acquire land if it's not a MoCD project associated with a ground lease? There will be private folks that would be selling their land, and named here like COPA, which is Community Opportunity Purchase Act, which this also ties into later on Keith's presentation a little bit. And also sometimes folks would be land banking. And that is something what TNDC is doing right now for this site, when they're saying that they're acquiring the building and will have to go through the closing process. That is the acquisition piece. I think I see a couple chats going on here. Okay. So next slide here. Oops. So first thing first is also the developer would need to then assemble the development team. The developer will be having a project manager or an assistant project manager working on the project. They will then be looking out for an architect to figure out the physical design, to do the back on the envelope, just like try to pencil out like how many units that would be. So referring to this case that the project that TNDC is looking into, they probably already have an architect that kind of pencil out how many units that they could put up. In this case, it's 100 units. But this is like very, very basic sketch that they would like to see if it's worth it to even put in, invest into this project. Then later on, we will be looking into selecting a general contractor to get some cost estimates. We're looking into potential lenders who would be providing financing. Definitely, as I mentioned earlier, on the community advocates piece, identifying folks who would be advocating and supporting your project. Also, identifying folks who may be opposing to your project because you need to convince them to further, to turn that opposition to be support. And there's one more piece here that says joint venture partner, because that some projects itself, some developers might not have enough experience, and that setting Meta as a case, we actually had development partners to be on our project because Meta has only started doing affordable housing work in the past 5 to 6 years, and in order to get tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, you need to have a experienced development partner to be on it. So a joint venture partner could possibly be happening here. But in like a lot of folks who are already experienced, they probably don't need this piece. Okay, we'll move along. So we went through the acquiring the land or building piece. Just circle back, like that could be 0 to 3 months worth of time. And I'm referring TNDC's case because it's like the hands-on what we're experiencing right now. So they are probably in contract with the seller, and they have up to a certain time to close, which Joseph mentioned that like early May is probably their closing date. So that's why they're at the stage of working, try to assemble the team, also try to gain community support. As you could see, that's where they're probably at right now. But let's say that like everything goes smoothly, then they're moving towards pre-development. Pre-development includes entitlements process, financing, and pre-constructions. And this could go, depending on the scale of the project, it could go as quickly as 3 months, or it could stretch out to all the way for 3 years. Why is that so? Is because there's a lot to go into it. We would need to look into the continuing with the physical design, cost estimation of the hard costs, like how much it takes to build this building. So you need to select a general contractor to provide you with the costs. And along the way, throughout the 3 years, let's just say that, you would have different stages of cost estimation depending on your architect building on their design. So your architect might start off with something that is very basic as the conceptual design, then your contractor would cost it out. As they learn more about the building and building more complex systems and understanding how the building is going to look like, then there will be more and more complex design and more information for the contractor to price out the project. There is the program design piece, because we would need to want to know what is the building is like for, like which area median income of folks are we targeting? Is this for families? Is this for seniors? And the recent buildings that I worked on, one just finished, is senior housing, so it's for age 62 and up. There's another project that we're working on right now that it's 127 units for low-income families, but we have a set aside for transition-age youth. So like different building might have a different program design, and then we'll also have to figure out what that rent structure is going to look like, and also that goes along with the services that we touched a little bit upon earlier. Later on in the stage, like residential services is something that is, I would say, kind of unique for affordable housing, because market rate housing would not come with a residential services coordinator to get families, you know, referred with services that probably are in need. If folks would like to get, like, you know, apply for food stamps or other services, like that's what the residential services person would be there for. So like program design, also think through if like what that services would be looking like as a very bare basic at the beginning. Then there's the entitlements approval, which will be going through planning department approvals, different layers of design. You first meet with your planner. And as you also going through your environmental planning clearances, that's also another step within the planning department. And it will then eventually go to planning commission. And oftentimes, if there is community opposition to your project, then that will then trigger something called the discretionary review over at the planning commission. And eventually, if planning commission could not get this resolved, then it probably escalated to board of supervisors to make sure that you could get to your planning approvals. Let's say everything went well, planning department approves, you then need to apply for your building permit along with the design that your architect has been working with you on. That's why the entitlements process is very key for the community support piece, because the make it or break it is like sort of whether you have enough people to support your project to demonstrate to the commissioners or board of supervisors that this project is very much needed in your neighborhood. And during these 3 to 36 months, it's also securing financing. Throughout the whole process, there are different types of financing applications for the project. So when at first we talk about pre-development financing, so that is funding during this period of time to use. But then you then need to secure the financing for construction and also permanent financing as well for down the line. So I'm going to move forward to types of financing for traditional affordable housing. And I know that Dawn mentioned this before. It's like, what are the ones that are out there? Like, why do we have to depend on this? Can we think through this like creatively? What other items that can we do? So in this case, traditional affordable housing, we often rely on low-income housing tax credits. And there are 2 different types. There's 4% and 9%. 4% you'll have to combine it with tax-exempt bonds, and usually that will be issued by City and County of San Francisco. There's also something called 9%, which is a competitive tax credit application that just goes in by itself, but you will have to basically compete throughout like the state of California. And you would, like in the housing world, you will often hear someone call low-income housing tax credits in California TCAC, is because it stands for Tax Credit Allocation Committee, TCAC. So that's the short term for California folks calling tax credits TCAC. In other states, you will probably hear people call it LIHTC because of LIHTC, of low-income housing tax credits. So those are the jargons out there. Along with that, that funds like a significant portion, tax credits and tax-exempt bonds. But then you will also need to fill in the gaps of your project. Then you will be going out to state departments to get state financing. Oftentimes there is Department of Housing and Community Development, state HCD. In the past, there were more products also from CalHFA, which is California Housing Finance Agency. But since the recession, they focus more on homeownership projects, less so on rental projects at this point. And then key financing partner in the local level, definitely MoCD, would be putting in a lot of funding in terms of both pre-development as well as the overall overall life of the project. There's the construction loan that we need to find a conventional bank that would be investing in that. And then at the end of the day, there is a permanent loan piece, which means that when you're done with your construction, you would need to find financing to pay out your construction loan because it's only a short-term loan in this case. So we'll need to pay it back by either like with the tax credits that we got, along with a small permanent loan that we have to pay back for the construction loan. And then at the end of when the building is keep on moving along with operations, that's when we're keep on paying for our hard debt on the permanent loan piece. The financing could go into like a totally different weeds, like could get very confusing. So that's like just the basics that I could explain at this point. Yeah, so I'm gonna move along. We also talked about just now, like during the pre-development phase, we would also need to figure out how many people would be living in each household. So this is sort of the rule of thumb. What's the legal maximum occupancy in each type of unit? So 1 bedroom is typically for 1 to 3 people. 2-bedroom unit could be between 2 to 5 people, and then a 3-bedroom unit will be between 3 to 7 people. And we also talk about area median income, which target population are we working with? And I wanted to bring up that the incomes that is listed on this sheet is actually a little, it's outdated. So we actually need to fill in with new information. It's probably from 2016 to 2017, but I already had this set up, and then I kind of don't want to, like as a PDF, like I just like put it here. It will take me forever if I have to change it out. But in general, this gives you an idea who are the people that we would be serving, and when we talk about AMIs. So like oftentimes for folks who, like for affordable housing, we are probably serving people like around 70% AMI or below. And these could be folks who would be in these occupation. And it really depends on it, like when we're putting it into our unit mix, it could be a combination of how many units that we're setting at 20% area median income, 30% area median income, 50, 60, to make up the building breakdown, and also how much is leveraging our scoring for our financing applications. So a lot of it, when we're looking into income restrictions and rent restrictions, we also really have to see how it plays out with our financing regulatory agreements to make it the most competitive as possible. So this is kind of a guide, and it should be updated. And oftentimes family housing, I would say that would be serving like 60% area median income and below. But I also don't want to exclude the folks that are between 80% to 120% area median income, because that will be relevant to what Keith is going to be sharing on small sites, because small sites actually have a different area median income that like population that we serve. Then it goes into the construction phase, which typically, depending on the size and the scale of the building, construction method and whatnot, the building itself might take from 12 months to 24 months. However, if we are taking on a small building, that construction time might be much smaller, like shorter time frame. And during the construction process, like if we are doing a gut rehab, that means that we're going to be demolishing any like existing structure. If we're building ground up, then we also need to figure out preparing the site, excavating for the foundation. If your site actually had some like toxic soils there before, then you have to go into remediation for soils. And just overall making sure that everything's together according to building code. Also, with affordable housing now, like, you know, being on the green trend for the past 20 years, also trying to achieve energy efficiency and making it as much as environmentally friendly as possible. So projects have to basically go through some, like you would hear it LEED, or there's another rating system called Green Point Rated. That is something that like our buildings are also looking forward to as well. Then towards the end, when the building is done, then the building inspector would be deeming it final, like doing final inspection and having the certificate of occupancy is the actual ticket that we could like get people moved in. And normally 6 to 9 months before the project is done with completion, that's when the property management company would be dealing with marketing of the units, also conducting the lottery for residents, and also figuring out the wait list. So there's a marketing and lease-up component to it as well. And for operations, that's the last phase, and that's when the developer, the project manager, is basically done with their job, and then they're going to have the project sent over to project management, residential services, and asset management. They will be like a totally different departments that are handling that. In terms of occupancy, we then, like after the lottery and the marketing process, like people are then finally moving in, and the day-to-day management and ongoing maintenance is being done by the property management staff. And the residential services will be also a different component, a different group of folks that will be working with the residents. And oftentimes, like residential services are the ones that are working to retain the tenants to be in the building, because oftentimes they're the ones that understand that they might not be able to pay their rent because of certain reasons, and they could advocate for the tenants themselves as well. So a good property management and residential services team is like they work hand in hand, and also using tenant retention as their like, you know, like definitely their foremost reason to keep the tenants in place. And there's also a group of folks that do asset management, which is different from property management. Asset management folks is making sure that the building are in compliance with the different funders, and also looking through the long-term property financial health, making sure that like the buildings systems are doing well, and they also have to look into like at what point in time they need to change out certain systems, like boiler is not working in 10 years or however that would be. That will be on the asset management team, also working with property management to understand the day-to-day how that has been impacting the building in the long term. So the other types of affordable housing in San Francisco, I'm going to have Keith to go through that. But Joseph, do you think that we should take questions right now for my piece before we get to the next part?
I'm sure, yeah, we could. You only have a couple, so go ahead and look in the chat. If anybody is holding back on questions, go ahead and type them into the chat now, and yeah, let's go ahead and take those. And just wanted to note that Connie wrote in what the acronym MOHCD stands for, Mayor's Office of of Housing and Community Development. So thanks, Connie, for typing that in there. Appreciate that.
Let's see. Let's start. Are the architects currently working on the planning on board for the building design or development, or is it still open for other firms to bid? So it depends. I believe that once the developer decided to work with the architect, that would be the architect that would be working throughout.
Yeah, and just in case that relates
yeah.
specifically to the TNDC development, they have selected their architect, and their architect will be participating in the meeting on the 20th that I was talking about earlier.
Is TNDC or the developer completely responsible for determining the rent structures in each development, or is that mandated by the city or other government or community groups? So it depends on what type of financing that they will be using. If, let's say, they are using MOCD money, then that means that they would have to be abiding by MOCD guidelines, how the project is gonna be doing. But then, if let's say that I am using state financing as well, then, and it's a combination, right? So I'm using state financing, I'm using local financing. It will be the most restrictive regulatory guidelines from each like the agency that has the strictest guideline would be the one that really determining the final rent structure. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Connie, for that, for the acronym. And can the community be involved in selecting the property management team? Some are better than others in relation to how tenants are treated. So it really depends on the developer if they already have a property management arm. So let's say TNDC, for example, they have their in-house property management company. And there are situations like Meta, we actually do not have our own property management arm. So we rely on our development partner for their property management services. I know that in terms of selecting the property management team, I don't think there's like much that we could do, but you could certainly provide feedback if saying like, hey, based on your like previous track record, I know that there's issues like, you know, with your property manager doing XYZ, and that is detrimental to the community. So what's your plan of fixing that? Like, you can definitely have the right to say that and ask about that. Who can tell us if everyone will have a window through which they can see the sky? I would say that it really depends on how the shape of the, like, not the shape of the building, like the how the land itself is being positioned, and the architect actually would have to follow guidelines to make sure that they are getting as much sun as possible. And so, but then there's no real thing that tenants could really be ensuring that like their unit will be getting what they need as adequate sunlight, or having a window to look out. All habitable units must have a window, and that is per building code. And there are also places, also buildings, there are certain walls that unfortunately cannot just open up a window opening because their next door property may have in the future an opportunity to build higher. So they do need to keep like one wall like completely without window openings as well. So it really depends on how DBI, that they are following their DBI code. So a lot of people all eyes are in it, like on it, like, you know, to make sure that the building is, you know, quality for folks. Does the ability to find a developer depend upon market forces that is there always a profit motive for motive for all participants in housing development? I think I would need a little bit further clarification from Dawn on this one.
Don, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I was just wondering that the financing is so complicated, and getting people to commit to being a participant in a development. Are we relying upon their need to make a profit out of a project?
So, so this is the difference between a for-profit developer versus a non-profit developer. Non-profit developers are actually being capped of how much developer fee we could receive. There are questions in the past before, like that I've been in community meetings, like people were very opposed of us going very tall in the mission. And they were like, you must be getting more money to develop a higher building. And unfortunately, on our side, no matter how many more units you build, you're capped for your developer fee. So to answer that on the first hand. And then on the second, the market forces does have a impact on this in terms of how much tax credit investment we will probably get. Because low-income housing tax credits are looking for actually big corporations or folks that are participating as a tax credit investor, so that they could get their tax benefits, so they could pay less taxes by way of saying that I'm investing into an affordable housing project. So tax credits, it's not a dollar for dollar. It's actually very driven by market. So at the time that the market is not doing great, let's just rewind back to 2008, 2009, when the recession hit. The like levels of us getting a tax credit pricing is $1 to probably below $1. Some might be at 85 cents or 90 cents. So you're not getting as much as you should be to get for a project that could technically, if in a great market, we could get above $1. So it's on both ends, but as nonprofit developers, we actually don't make much profit out of all of this. We're using our developer fee, really paying for our staff and admin costs at the end of the day.
I guess I didn't mean to just talk specifically about the developer. I meant all the players who are involved in development, like the construction, the banks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Contractors definitely could benefit quite a bit when the project, like when the market is doing great. So I would say that for the past 4 to 5 years, like contractors are in a very good market because they have so many jobs that they could do. Like everybody is in a building movement that they actually have to turn down jobs. Sometimes they scare people away by giving like an even higher number to drive people away. So yeah, like contractors definitely, and as I mentioned, like on the tax credit market, and also on the loan lenders side as well, like if interest rates are going higher, like that's also on their end as well, all around.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any others on the chat. So actually, well, keep thinking about it. If a question comes up for you, go ahead and put it on the chat, but I'm going to turn it over to Keith, and if everybody can thank Elaine. Thank you, Elaine. Nice work. Yay. All right, Keith, you're up.
All right, can I use share screen?
Maybe Elaine can do it again. She can share.
Well, I have just like 3 slides.
Oh,
yeah, you should go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Thanks, Elaine. I just have 3 slides. It turned out that our file server crashed over the weekend, so I couldn't access our presentations at the Land Trust. So I had to just do a vanilla style presentation. But I'm not quite.
So Keith, it should be on the bottom. There should be a button that says share screen.
Yeah.
Go ahead and click on that. And
then
it takes a minute for it to switch over. But it should work.
okay. Don't see.
Do you see the share screen button?
Yeah, I've got it, and I'm just trying to. Oh, I have to give some access to. Okay.
It should be asking you what do you want to share.
Yeah, but it's sending me to some permissions that I have to do for security. Well, they were very bare bones anyway, so I'm just going to proceed without these slides.
Keith, if you email the slides to me, I'll send them around to everybody afterwards.
Yeah. Okay.
And on that point, if you are new to Richmond District Rising, because there's a lot of people on this video right now. If you're new, go ahead and put your email into the chat, and I will add you to the Richmond District Rising list so that you can get all these materials and everything. Okay, Keith.
All right. Thanks. Yeah, Elaine did a really great job of talking about the production side of housing development. And I really want to talk about the preservation side. And that is the acquisition and rehab of residential buildings. And that removes housing from the speculative market and brings it into ownership by community-based nonprofits to rehabilitate the building and preserve permanent affordability. You know, in the last 20 years, the for-profit rental housing has really begun to decrease in San Francisco, and it's becoming increasingly unaffordable. It used to be the way for low and moderate income tenants to find housing. But as the speculative market has increased in the city, it's forced some residential buildings to be converted into tenants in common. And in the past, a lot of them were converted into condominiums. And rent control has helped to keep those units affordable for the residents that live in them. But it hasn't helped when a unit becomes vacant. It's set to the market rate. And, you know, basically in the last 10 years, that market rate is no longer affordable. So that's why a preservation program can really help by transferring ownership into the hands of nonprofits. And recognizing this, the city of San Francisco started in 2014 a preservation program called the Small Sites Program, also known as SSP. And this program is run by the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to help low and moderate income households to avoid displacement and eviction. So what this program does is to provide soft debt subsidies in the form of 30-year loans to community-based nonprofits, so which enables them to purchase residential buildings. There are some eligibility requirements for the Small Sites Program. A minimum of 66% of tenants in a building must earn an average of 80% adjustable median income. And once a building is acquired, it's taken out of rent control, and there may be some rent adjustments required because MoCD also requires households to pay at least 20% of their income for rent. So also there's other eligibility, as it depends on the purchase price of the building, the condition of it, the rehab costs, and it does require the agreement of the tenants in the building, because they're going to have their rents adjusted, and they're no longer going to be subject to rent control. The leases under small sites are very similar to rent control, except rent increases are capped at between 2 and 3.5%. So there's quite a few advantages for a preservation program such as small sites over production, because you can acquire a building basically in a matter of months. A building can be acquired in 3 or 4 months. Typically it's lower cost, so we would have to pay somewhere in the order of $450,000 per unit, and that's quite a bit less than the per unit cost for development. It's also a good strategy for anti-displacement, and if a building is being Ellis acted, an owner might be willing to sell a building to a non-profit, and then we can keep it affordable. And I think also the preservation program has a smaller environmental impact, because there's not these massive construction works and the new materials. But it does have the disadvantage that it's not creating new units. Sometimes you can create a few units, through developing accessible dwelling units, or they're also called ADUs. The other disadvantage with the preservation program is that it's very difficult to scale. To purchase one building, let's say a 4-unit building, that involves a lot of labor, a lot of evaluation, and the Small Sites Program allows nonprofits to acquire buildings between 4 units and 25 units. But the preservation process, development process, is really quite similar to the process that Elaine outlined. Really, the first part of it is identifying homes to purchase. It's answering the question, you know, how are we going to find buildings worthy of acquisition? And what we found at the Land Trust is we find buildings in a number of ways. Tenants often email us when the building becomes up for sale because they're really concerned about a building being for sale. There's the uncertainty of who is going to be the new owner of a building. And some new owners are not benign or benevolent. They may try and force households out. They can't evict them except through the owner move-in eviction or Ellis Act, but they might try and buy tenants out. For example, you know, I live in a 12-unit building in the inner Richmond, and I've just been here about 2.5 years. And at the end of last year, the owner started to approach the lower rent units in my building, offering buyouts to them. And in December, the owner of the building offered me a buyout. And buyouts often come with, you know, pressure from the owner to move people out. And we all know that inevitably brings displacement out of this neighborhood, out of the city, because an owner is not going to pay you enough money to find an affordable home somewhere else in Richmond. The funds that they offer for a buyout may just last a couple of months or if that. So that's one way, tenants emailing us and asking us to look at the building. And more recently, with the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, we're now getting COPA notices. So before a building can be offered for sale, an owner has to let us know that a building is for sale and give a nonprofit the option to to say they're interested in purchasing the building. And if a nonprofit express interest, we have 5 days to express that interest, and then we get 25 days to put together an offer on that. So then the next real phase is pre-development, and that involves evaluating buildings that we could possibly purchase. And unlike production, the resident engagement is really important because we have to have 66% of, 75% of the tenants have to agree to the purchase. And it's really important to do a sort of social assessment of the building, how many households are protected, whether they're seniors or disabled or families with children. Is the building vulnerable to displacement? Is it likely to be converted to a tenants in common, a TIC? So this is the kind of social assessment that we do. And at the same time, we're doing a financial feasibility, looking at what the purchase price is, how much is rehabbing the building going to cost to bring it up to health and safety standards. So there's a lot of financial feasibility to be done. When we purchase a building through small sites, we do get a subsidy from the city, but it's in the form of a soft debt. That is a 30-year loan at 3% interest. Each year, if we get enough cash, a surplus cash, we can pay the interest on that loan. But if we don't have surplus cash, then the interest is forgiven. But the small sites limits you to $350,000 subsidy per unit. And we also have to get funding from a bank or some kind of hard debt. And recently there's been bond money that the Mayor's Office of Housing has, where we can get a loan for about 3.4%. And that loan is underwritten by the rents in the building. So all of that really has to be looked at closely, and then we have to approach the Mayor's Office of Housing, and in the last couple of years, there is something that's been set up called the San Francisco Housing Accelerator Fund. And it's a private-public partnership that provides bridge financing. Because the Mayor's Office of Housing has a really, long process for approving financing, then what we found through small sites is we needed a quicker way to get financing. And the Housing Accelerator Fund is able to provide this bridge financing at a much quicker than the Mayor's Office of Housing can. So we can be approved for financing within 60 days. But eventually we have to, but that bridge financing only lasts from 1 to 2 years. And eventually we have to get financing for long-term hard debt, like a mortgage, and also get the soft debt subsidy from the Mayor's Office of Housing. But when we're in bridge financing, it's okay, we can wait for that 3 or 4 months that it takes for the Mayor's Office of Housing to approve a loan. So acquisition is a similar phase, and then we go into construction, which we call rehabilitation, because we're rehabbing the building, and the main focus on that rehab is getting the building in a sound, safe, and healthy conditions. Because, you know, we all know that for-profit rent-controlled buildings, often there's a lot of deferred maintenance and neglect on part of long-term owners there. So some of the buildings that we acquire are in very poor condition, and we focus on doing structural work, making sure they're seismically sound, on making sure that all the major systems are in the building are sound, make sure that the roof is in good condition, the electric, the plumbing, that is all done. And we follow a very similar process that Elaine mentioned in rehabilitation. Then the final phase is what Elaine called operations, and we really call the stewardship of the property and its inhabitants. And the land trust, we have an outside property management company that manages our properties. But we do in-house asset management for making sure that our buildings are compliant. One of the ways that we can get a building financially sustainable is something called welfare exemption. And it enables us to get a property tax discount on our buildings. But to get that property tax discount, it can only be for households whose income is 80% AMI or less. And that means that we have to do an annual income certification for all our residents. And that's also a difference, you know, from rent control. And it's often hard for tenants to accept that they have to do this annual income certification. And that's something that we do when we're doing the social assessment on the building in pre-development. So that's really important. There are other things, you know, I could get into, and that is to do with, you know, limited equity models for ownership, things like cooperative ownership of buildings. And I think we've covered, you know, such a lot of ground this evening that I don't really want to get into those issues this evening. And we can save that for another time when I can also talk about community land trusts, which are a very different model of a community-based non-profit than.
So that's a good preview of coming attractions. So if everybody can give it up for Keith for a great presentation. Thank you. So so a couple of things. So Elaine was teaching us about how to build a building. Keith was buying our apartment buildings and taking them off of the market. Both are amazing strategies and very complicated, as you can see. Keith has some visual presentations that he's going to be sending around, and well, he'll send them to me and then I'll send them to everyone. Pam, I just want to give you a shout out for taking notes in the chat. So if everybody can look in the chat, Pam's been keeping us up to date with everything that Keith was presenting in the chat. Thank you so much. It's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just answer Don's question?
I was going to say, we've got a couple of questions I think that are coming in.
Okay.
So Don, since I only see one in the chat, you want to just ask it verbally? You want to take yourself off of mute?
Oh yeah, I was just listening to your explanation of this income certification that has to be done annually. And I just wanted to know whether that had any impact on, in terms of a resident's ability to stay in that housing.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Yeah, the small sites program is only income based at the time of purchase. So when we do the initial income certification just prior to purchase of a building, we have to look at rents and adjust them, because the mayor's office does require that all tenants pay a minimum of 20% of their income for rents. But once a community-based nonprofit has purchased the building, then the annual income certifications does not affect rent, or it does not affect the tenant's ability to stay in the building.
Okay, but it may affect how much they pay.
No, that's only at purchase. It's only at purchase.
Oh, okay.
Only when the building is purchased. After that, they can, we don't reset the rent based on income at all. The rent just goes up between 2 and 3.5% every year.
Oh, okay. So it's just a minor inconvenience for the tenant to have to fill this thing out.
It is, and it is a minor inconvenience, but it does allow us to help to get the building financially sustainable, because as you know, property taxes are very high in the city, and if we can get a property tax discount of 50% or 100%, it really helps the building's finances a lot.
I see.
And sometimes people's rent goes down.
Margaret, what did Margaret have to say?
There's also in small sites, when we purchase the building, it turns out a tenant is paying more than 50% of their income on rent, then there's the possibility that the rent will be lowered. So when we purchased a building in the NOPA area, there was an old lady there who was paying something like 68% of her Social Security income on rent. And when we purchased the building, we lowered her rent by 17%. So that really made a difference for her. And the other thing is, if during the annual income certification, we find that a tenant is paying more than 50% of their income on rent, then they're not required to pay the annual rent increase.
Go ahead. So Diane has a question.
Yeah.
So based on, I think this is more for Elaine because it's about the TNDC development, but based on your presentation, Elaine, it sounded like the best time to get involved with a project is really early, like at the phase that we're at right now with TNDCs, in order to kind of shape the actual building type and services. Is that right?
Let's just see if Elaine is there.
I'm here, but
Okay, cool.
I knocked off my headset right when you were asking your question. Can you repeat?
Sure. What it sounds like the best time for us to get involved in shaping the project is right now, for example, with TNDC to determine what types of residents and the incomes and services and stuff like that. Is that right?
Yeah, I think oftentimes I would say developer, when they're ready to meet with the community, they have a baseline of what they are envisioning for what they plan on building on the site. So for us to get involved as soon as possible is great, because I don't know, like different developers' style is different. So they may be open to thoughts like from the community and revise their design. But I think that the fact that they're reaching out to us even at the time of that they're purchasing the building is actually a good sign, because they should have only probably done their baseline massing and not really having the program really thought out. And the fact that they're not even in contract, like they're in contract, they haven't even closed yet. I think that they're trying to really engage with the community and see what we would like out of this project.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions for Keith or for Elaine? I'm not seeing any on the chat. You can just unmute yourself and jump in if you want. Well, seeing none, Keith or Elaine, any last thoughts from either of you?
No, I think I'm okay. Like if there are like, questions that folks thought about after today, like, feel free to email. I can definitely answer it via email too.
Yeah, the small sites program is very detailed and rules oriented, and if anyone wants to dive deeper into that, I can provide the city documentation on that and all the details. But I wanted to spare you most of.
That's
I
really
have a
helpful.
quick question.
Yeah.
This is Dahlia. Just one quick question. That was so informative from you both. Thank you so much. I think I was wondering, like, when we think about the Richmond and when we think about sites that might be developed on, like parking lots or churches, is part of that process when we think about what we want for that and being proactive, like approaching organizations like Meta or affordable housing developers that we think, like Pam was saying, like have heard treat tenants better or that we would want to work with, and like working with them on it? Or is it really, does each affordable housing developer really determine like what site they can buy based on the capital that's available to them, and it doesn't, us being part of that initial process like doesn't make sense? Don asked something similar, but
I would say that it goes hand in hand. If we see something that we're interested and would like to pitch it for the developer, I think that we should do that, like, and have them figure out if they have the dollars and cents to be able to do it. Because we definitely need to start with the community advocacy. Just set the mission as an example. The projects that I was telling you about that are in construction or just being like finished development, all those are community fought land. That was like the community pushing for mayor's office of housing to like, and planning department to like, pay attention that, hey, these are opportunity sites that could develop into affordable housing. So without the community forces, like, and without us like pushing forward, they probably always would just think that, oh, the west side is fine. Like, you know, we're going to devote our, our attention, like, you know, to the areas that are definitely in need. But like, you know, across districts, like there should be all like equitable like opportunities to go move forward. So without us like pushing for that, like developer probably won't know, or the city won't know, and just like pay less attention to us too. So I would say that is if both.
That's so helpful. Thanks, Elaine. And then my last question is also just kind of like a request. Keith, that was amazing. Thank you so much. And I think it's a really great resource that we need more and more tenants to just know more about the small sites program. And then just thinking about other alternative kind of ownership models like you mentioned, and relationship to like land and decommodifying housing and all of that. I look forward to a future presentation or whatever way makes sense to share with us more about the community land trust and cooperative housing, just so that we can be aware of like the other side of besides development, like other strategies in the Richmond.
Yeah, thanks, Dahlia. I just want to mention, you know, from your earlier question, I think looking at the longer term, you know, what we need in the Richmond is a community-based nonprofit whose focus is the Richmond district. You know, we have Meta, you know, whose initial focus was on the mission. There was Tenderloin Development Neighborhood Corporation. They started off in the Tenderloin. We have CCDC in Chinatown. You know, we really need a nonprofit developer that is based in the Richmond and is receptive and is controlled by the community here.
So I'll just jump in on that really quick, and then I'll call on Dawn because I see her hand up. So I'm going to be starting to work for Meta soon. Sounds like in the next couple of weeks. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing for Meta. Is I'm going to be, we've actually got 2 organizations that are based in the Richmond already that we're going to be starting to talk to later this week, who are interested in doing housing development. So we're going to be doing an assessment of their capacity and desire to do this, and then figuring out how we can get from them not doing housing development to being housing developers. And then there may be others. So I'm really excited to be working on that project with Meta coming up soon. So hopefully we'll be having some new partners based here in the Richmond, which will be really exciting. Dawn, go ahead. Dawn, we can't hear you. I'm going to unmute you, I think.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, my question, it may be a stupid question, but I mean, are there things legally that can be done to affect the actual cost of the housing? Like in terms of like taking houses off the competitive market, so that the housing prices don't escalate to the point where it makes it so difficult to develop housing, to preserve housing. You know, things like zoning or things that have to do with restricting, you know, how we commodify housing and property.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm not sure there's anything we can do directly. I think, you know, the current state of the housing market is really a result of the financialization of housing. The way the, you know, banks have moved predominantly to providing mortgages, well, to loans based on property, and and then, that something like 85, 90% of their loans are for the purchase or development of property, and only 10% of their loans are, to finance productive activity by business.
Right, so they're giving loans because they expect a return on their investment. They expect appreciation of that property.
Yeah.
What if that property did not appreciate? What if we could depreciate all the properties?
Yeah, if we could transfer a substantial portion of the housing stock into nonprofit ownership, then that would change the market a lot.
So would public financing.
And public ownership.
Absolutely. Don, do you have a follow-up or any other questions from anybody? Go ahead.
No, not really. I was just advocating for the elimination of all private property.
I saw at least 1 thumbs up, 2 thumbs ups.
One thing though, unfortunately, like when it comes to like publicly owned housing, San Francisco Housing Authority has not been doing a good job since its existence, and unfortunately have to give part of their portfolio to nonprofit developers, to take on that becoming affordable housing. So that it has to go along with good management too, on that end, to make sure that it balances out, that it become quality housing that is being provided to the tenants as well.
Thanks, Elaine. Dahlia, did you want to say your comment? No? Okay, cool. Any other questions? Thanks, Elaine, by the way, for that comment. Appreciate it. Cool. Thanks everyone for spending your time this evening. That was incredibly informative. Once again, thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Keith. Really appreciate your time and all of your knowledge that you shared with us, and all the amazing questions. I have been recording this, so I will send, I'm not exactly sure I'm gonna archive this, but once I figure that out, I'll send you all a link, along with the information that Keith sends me. Once Keith sends me his slides, I'll package that, and I'll probably just resend what Elaine produced as well. So it's all kind of in one email, so everybody's got that. And yeah, stay tuned for the next session. I got a couple of emails tonight. If anybody else was on here who thinks that I don't have their email, please put it in the chat so that I can follow up with you. And yeah, just a big appreciation to everyone for spending your time this evening to learn this stuff. It's really important and complicated, and we'll keep the conversation going. So thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
You stop the recording.
Yes.